Hello everyone, Eric Chappell, Civil Community Evangelist for Autodesk, and I want to welcome you to today's webcast. New year, new update. What's new in InfraWorks 360 2017.3? Sarah Cunningham, Product Manager, is going to be our main presenter today, so we're glad to have her along. We've also got a whole crew in the background who will be taking questions, and that would be Nick Zeben, Jim Gear, Austin Jeffson, and I think a few other people as well. So we've got a whole team here to present this to you and answer your questions as well. Before we get into that, though, I just want to talk a little bit about our webcast series and our community for those of you who may be new to the series. We try to do this twice a month, first and third Wednesdays of the month, and the stars of the show are typically folks from our product team. Today is no exception. And the goal here is to really provide a line of communication between, one of many lines of communication actually, between you guys, the users, and the folks who make the software. And it gives you a chance to ask some questions, provide some feedback, and just kind of hear from the folks here at Autodesk what's going on with the technologies that we develop. Our next webcast, by the way, I mentioned Nick's name. He will be one of the presenters on January 18th, talking about grading and transitions within component roads. He'll be joined by Seth Hall. And so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into component roads in those specific areas, and I think that's going to be a really interesting webcast. So watch the different areas listed below for information on how to register for that webcast and get that on your calendar. I want to launch a few polls to get some direct feedback from you guys. The first one is, what is your current usage level with InfraWorks 360? And we've got 5 choices up there, ranging from not even having it installed up to using it on every project. Couldn't live without it. So let us know where you're at on the spectrum as far as usage of InfraWorks 360. And so far, about 70% of you have voted, and regular use on some projects is the clear winner with 37%. So that's great to hear. It's great to see that so many of you are using it on a regular basis. I'm going to close that poll, and we'll move to the next one, which is, what type of work do you do with InfraWorks 360? And this is a multiple answer poll, so when I start shouting out percentages, I don't have horrible math skills. They actually don't all add up to 100%. So choices are site design, road design, GIS, data compilation for early project planning, residential design, and visualizing projects. And as of right now, the clear winner with 56% of the vote in is visualizing projects with 83%. 60% for site designs, 60% for road design, 55% for GIS data, that upfront project work. And the clear trailer is residential design with only 20% of the vote. So interesting results there. Let me close that poll down, and we've got one more for you. And since we've got the attention of the product team, as we often do, tell us what areas of the software you would like to see developed. So choices here are road design, site design, residential design, rail design, and other. So far, with about 40% of the vote in, site design has pulled ahead. And in last place is rail. And then we've got that other category. And what I'd like to ask you to do is, if you've chosen other, go ahead into the questions panel in the GoToWebinar interface and just type in there what your other option was. And like I said, we've got folks keeping an eye on that panel, so let us know what you're thinking there as far as the other is concerned. So 75% of the votes are in, and site design has got 68% support. Next is road design, followed by residential, and then other, and then rail. Thanks for your input on those polls. It's a huge help to let us know what you're thinking. I want to tell you guys a little bit about our community hub. This you can find at autodesk.com/InfraWorks360 community, although we are transitioning this over to be not just an InfraWorks community, but a civil product community, which includes Civil 3D as well as Recap, or maybe even a little Revit, if that makes sense. but whatever's relevant to what's going on. And what you'll find at this hub are links to the many different ways that you can interact with other users and the product team as well. So the discussion forum, idea station, infra tips, the gallery. I have the new stamp next to that. That was overhauled a few months ago with support for a lot more ways to upload the projects that you're working on, not just videos and images, but also 3D models and stereo panoramas and all kinds of cool stuff, all kinds of cool ways that you can share the projects that you're working on. And we've also got lots of video content up there, including all of the webcasts in this series. We've been doing this, I think, for close to 2 years or a little over 2 years. We've got a huge library now of all of the recordings of all the previous webcasts, and I've actually remembered to hit the record button on this one as well, so this one will be added to the library later today or early tomorrow. So a great resource to go back through and learn lots of different stuff about this technology. A little disclaimer, I don't know that we're going to get into preview features today, but just in case it comes up, we want you to know that anything tagged as a preview or a labs feature is, there's no guarantee that you'll actually see that in a future version of the product that's fully supported, so don't make any purchasing decisions based on that. And please ask lots of questions. We've got a crew of people in behind the scenes who are there and ready to answer your questions, so put them to work. And the questions, also at times I may interrupt Sarah and throw out some questions that you guys are asking. Questions make a great presentation even better. So we want to know what you're thinking. We want you to leave the presentation fulfilled with your questions answered. So please don't hold back. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sarah. And Sarah, thanks. You can take it away.
And before I start, you should see a slide that says New Year, New Update.
We got it.
Perfect. Move this out of the way. So today we're going to talk about what's new in the latest update to InfraWorks 360, which is what we're calling 2017.3. Eric sort of stole my thunder. I was going to say that it's a new year, it's a new update, but the same old safe harbor statement. We go over it at the beginning of every webcast. So in addition to talking about things that are planned for release, they actually haven't released yet, but we expect to release them by the end of today, and if not the end of today, tomorrow. And we may talk about things that fall under the category of plans or future development. Like Eric said, things that are planned are just that. There are plans as of today, and they could change, so we advise that you don't make any significant decisions based on those plans. So let's get to the fun part. So the last time we talked was in September, and that's when we released an update. That's the last time we released an update to InfraWorks. So in the last 3 months or so, we've done some work to enhance what we launched in September. What hasn't changed, though, are our goals. So our goals for this year are, and these are, this slide actually presents goals not just for InfraWorks 360, which is really what we're talking about today, but goals for the civil infrastructure product line in general. The goals are to transition InfraWorks 360 to more of an engineering, design, authoring tool and platform with a focus on transportation. The focus on transportation also applies to Civil 3D, but we're not driving that to be more, or transitioning that to be a different type of tool, or transitioning it to being a detailed design tool. It already is one. We'd like to drive continued adoption of Civil 3D for detailed design and production documentation, again, with the same focus on transportation that we have for InfraWorks. The third goal is more of an emerging goal. It's not a goal we've focused on as directly during the first part of the year, but during the back half of the year, we're starting to ramp up this idea of connected BIM. It used to be that we talked about, and we still talk about, interoperability between products and moving infrastructure data to other infrastructure design products or other infrastructure analytics products or other products like Revit, which is widely known for building architecture but can support some aspects of infrastructure modeling. We're still talking about that, and we know that we need to improve the interoperability between our products and make it more seamless. And we're calling that in this particular goal we're referring to it as connected BIM or delivering connected BIM for the entire infrastructure portfolio. And we talk a little bit about how we might do that. Sometimes we use the phrases common data environment. We talk about using the cloud to make that possible. Those are just ways we might make that happen. But really the gist of that third bullet point is to focus on connected workflows. So those are the goals we had this year, and the one that's relevant to InfraWorks. And the one that's relevant to the updates I'll talk about today is that first one. I got a little fancy with the animations there. So before I get into what we've released, I wanted to take a step back and just give everyone a sense of what we've done over the past year. So prior to today, prior to January 4th, we had 2 releases. We released the first launch of InfraWorks 360 2017 back in April. There were a lot of features related to road and highway design and bridge design. The summary that's on this slide is a very brief summary and doesn't actually include everything. So from April, we spent about 5 months working towards the September release. A lot happened in that 5 months. We added a lot of new functionality. It was also kind of a spring cleaning time for us. We took a lot of functionality that had been in preview mode or on labs. For example, modeling with road components was something that had been in preview. So was bridge line girder analysis and some of the point cloud processing functionality. We did a lot of spring cleaning, so to speak, and promoted all of those things to become full features in InfraWorks. And that brought us to September when we released 2017.2. And there were a lot of new features. It was actually a pretty long presentation, if I remember correctly, back in September. We decided to release a little bit more frequently, I guess might be the right word. We decided to launch another release within just 3 months. We didn't wait another 5 months before we released because we felt we had a collection of things that enhanced what we launched in September and refined it to improve the usability, to improve the performance, to improve the stability. And those were really the reasons why we released on the schedule that we did. So that brings us to today. So our goal, again, for the year for InfraWorks, I know I say this over and over again, but I think it's important to convey the goal because it helps begin to explain why we've released or why we're working on the things we're working on. So we're still working towards that goal of transitioning InfraWorks to more of a detailed design authoring tool and platform for road and highway design. And when we look at how we're going to do that, we look at 4 key themes or areas. We look at the experience of using InfraWorks. And I have a fancy definition here, but really what I'm getting at is the idea that InfraWorks needs to look and behave like a detailed design tool. It's really that simple. The second item is modeling, and I usually describe this by saying it's not enough to look and feel like a detailed design tool. InfraWorks actually has to model things in great detail. And if you've used InfraWorks for any length of time, and you can think back to maybe 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of the assets that were in InfraWorks at that time didn't contain as much detail as they do today. So if you think about component roads, for example, compared to roads that you could model in InfraWorks a few years ago, component roads can contain a whole lot more information, a whole lot more detail, like design standards. They can respond to super elevation data. They can give you information about quantities. So we're doing a lot of work, not just on roads, although this year that was our focus, but our plan is to really take all of the assets in InfraWorks and make all of them more detailed in that same sort of way, where they can respond to rules, they can give you analytics, and they can contain more information that's useful, not just for preliminary design or visualization, but also useful as you work towards creating a model from which you can construct things. The other 2 things we talk about are connected workflows and the idea of InfraWorks as a platform. The 2017.3 release doesn't really focus on these 2 elements, but I wanted to mention them here because future presentations or future releases, you may start to see features and things related to these 2 themes start to emerge. The first is connected workflows, and that relates pretty directly to the goal that I just talked about, related to connected BIM and making infrastructure data available to other products and services. And there's also the idea of InfraWorks as a platform. One key element of the platform theme is APIs. We know many customers are asking for them. Many third-party developers are asking for them. And we are starting to transition teams to start working on how we might create those APIs and deliver them, and how we might leverage something like Autodesk Forge as a platform for making them available. But getting back to the topic for today's webcast, it's the January 2017 release highlights. They focus on the first two themes, the experience and modeling. And specifically within modeling, we're looking at reality capture or point cloud modeling, bridge, and road modeling as well. So let's just get right into them. First thing I'll talk about is some enhancements we made to the experience, and it relates to some new view settings. So in September, we launched the notion of views, and it was a way you could configure a number of the visualization effects on your model, how the images looked, how bright it was, that type of thing. And we compiled them on a panel so that you could configure the settings the way you wanted and then save them. And the idea here is that maybe you would create a view that was suitable for presentation purposes, and it might look something like the small image on the lower left corner. The colors are bright, everything is very highly rendered or somewhat highly rendered, and it looks like a true visualization of an area. Whereas a view you might configure to support detailed bridge design might look something like the image on the lower right, where you've screened back the image, you sort of faded out the colors a little bit so that the elements of the bridge design, which I admit is a little hard to see, the image is small, stand out a bit more so you can focus on the elements that you're designing. We made a subtle change to this, and it's the ability to assign a default mode. It's either select mode or edit mode to any view. For example, if you create a view that's used for engineering design, you may want the default mode on that view to be edit mode. Whereas if you have a view that's specific just for presentation purposes, you might want the default view to be select mode so that nobody can inadvertently edit it. You don't have to use them that way, but that was the thinking behind it. So you'll find that select or edit mode toggle on the view settings panel. The next bunch of features I'll talk about relate to modeling, because a lot of the work over the last 3 months went towards enhancing the modeling capabilities that were launched in September. So the first relates to reality capture. If you haven't used those features yet, I'll give you a little summary about what they do. Basically, you can bring a point cloud into InfraWorks, and in addition to doing things like theming it and visualizing it and looking at it, you can also extract data from it. So if you wanted to build a terrain model from point cloud data, you could do that. If you wanted to extract some assets from the point cloud, mostly vertical assets, things like signs or light poles, you can do that as well, and you can turn them into what InfraWorks calls city furniture, or just generic assets. So you can do both of those things, and the process is relatively automatic for both of them. We didn't add any new features to the point cloud terrain extraction or the feature modeling, but we did improve the performance, the stability, and the usability of those features just a bit. So this is what the point cloud terrain UI looked like during the last release, and the team changed it slightly. They didn't change the functionality, they just streamlined the UI a little bit, so it's a little bit shorter. They did the same thing with the vertical feature modeling UI. You can see here the panel is, got 5 or 6 different lines of information. They kept all that functionality and just reduced the clutter on the screen so that it took up less room in the modeling window. They also made some improvements to improve the performance and stability of either high-density point cloud data or very large data. So you may find, depending on the size of your point cloud model, that using it now in InfraWorks, you should see some improvements in both the speed of the performance and its stability. So the second big category was road modeling. In September, we introduced the idea of components and applying super elevation data to those components, and using components as a way of modeling in far more detail, more complex arrangements. of lanes and curbs and medians and so on and so forth. With this release, we spent some time thinking about how we show data in Canvas about those components when they're selected. And we've settled on this, or we've come up with this idea of what I'm going to call contextual annotations or design guides. And the reason I call them that is because just saying annotations or labels might imply that we've created this functionality to label things in an InfraWorks model that's kind of similar to how Civil 3D uses labels or text or mtext or dimensions, and that's not quite the case. What we're doing here in InfraWorks is we're surfacing information while you've selected something, in this case the road, so that you can see key stations. This is just a start of the kind of information we'd like to be able to surface in InfraWorks while you're designing. And this is a very basic start. It's just showing you key information on a selected object. I'll talk a little bit more about what some of our plans for this might be in the future. In addition to seeing the stations of things like the start and ends of curves, inflection points on your model, as you rotate your model, you change the camera view at which you're looking at your model. The annotations are smart enough to rotate, and that's what these two screenshots are meant to show. The annotations will adapt to however you're looking at the model so that they're always legible. In other words, the annotations aren't fixed. They move as you rotate with the model. And this is specific to component-based roads. Some of these annotations, this kind of adaptive behavior, if you will show up on some other features, but not yet all features in InfraWorks. We've started with roads for this particular release. Bridge modeling had 4 key updates for this release. The first was what they call the apply to next selection. And what that means is, for example, say you select a girder and you make some geometric edits to it, and you want to apply those edits to another girder. Maybe it's in the same girder group, maybe it's not. You can simply take those edits and apply them to the next selected component that's equivalent. It used to be you could do this for just all the girders on a bridge or all the girders in a group or all the exterior girders. Now you can be a little more selective about which ones you would apply it to. Girders is just the example that's shown here in the screenshot. The second feature relates to reusing bridge content. So in an InfraWorks model, you've got, and you're modeling a bridge, you've got piers and abutments and girders and decks and all of these components. And one of the things we wanted to address were the kinds of projects where engineers reuse the same bridge over and over. So we're not really talking about iconic looking bridges that are kind of one of a kind. That define a cityscape. We're really talking about bread and butter, meat and potatoes bridges that departments of transportation use over and over and over again on all of their roads in a given region. There's a lot of repetition. So these maybe aren't the bridges that you notice because they're absolutely visually interesting. These are just basic bridges, the ones that customers tend to do a lot of work on quite frequently. So what they did is they created the idea of a bridge template. And it's pretty simple. If you have a bridge in an InfraWorks model, it's a collection of components like girders and piers and abutments and all that. You can save that as a template, and you can save it on the style palette and reuse it either in the same model or in other models. It's kind of like starting with a subassembly in Civil 3D and using it from project to project to project. So there's that idea of bridge templates. To the best of my knowledge, the release will ship with 2 or 3 sample templates so you can see how they work. It might help you. They might be something you can start with for a project, but they also might be a good guide to help you create your own or get a sense of how they work before you start creating your own. The third item on the list relates to interoperability or connected workflows. Once a bridge is modeled in InfraWorks, that's really just part of a larger civil structures workflow that can involve documentation in Revit or rebar design. It can also involve a significant amount of structural analysis with different products. One of the things the team focused on was the connected workflow between InfraWorks and Revit. Now when you send your bridge model to Revit, you can choose to send it either as direct shape or families. And my understanding is that direct shape is a good solution. That's the new addition to that command is a good solution If you have particularly complex geometry at some point in your bridge and it's not coming over to Revit as families correctly or exactly as it appears in InfraWorks. So I think direct shape was a lot more flexible. One of the experienced designers from the bridge team, as well as one of the QA developers on that team are both on the call. So if you have specific questions, you should ask because they're the best people to answer. And the last but not least, I would maybe classify this as a usability improvement. You can modify girder materials on the stack. You can do that for a lot of other assets, and it's a pretty standard workflow. We just needed to catch up the girder material editing workflow with that standard. So now you can do that as well. Should make that a little bit easier.
Sarah, if I could interrupt you, we had an interesting question about the performance of the software that I saw Nick answered, but I thought it would be good to kind of air out for the group.
Sure.
The basic question is, with all the new features that keep getting added with each release, how do we handle that not impacting performance? And Nick had a great answer. I don't know if you want to chime in, Nick or Sarah. I'll let you two decide who wants to answer, but I thought the answer was interesting.
Well, let Nick share his answer, and then I'll chime in if I need to.
Okay.
Sure. Can you hear me, Eric?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, so the answer that I gave in the question window there was, so we have a set of performance tests that we run on the product every day, in fact, and those performance tests look at various aspects of the product. So they look at things like actual frames per second graphics performance, but they also look at things like model regeneration time and things like that. So obviously everything we add to the model, the more math or computations that we need to do, it's going to take more time, but we also try to weigh that against the added capabilities. So we're constantly tracking those, and sometimes we can go and do work from a performance or optimization standpoint that even with added things, the product is still net faster, but our goal is to at least not make it slower as we add these things. So it's definitely something we keep an eye on. And it will vary a little bit from release to release, but we do have a baseline that we track against and try and hold ourselves to.
I don't think I could have described it any better. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick.
Any other questions, Eric, that you want to bring up for the whole group?
None that I'll bring up at the moment, but there are tons that our behind-the-scenes group is knocking down very handily. So maybe when we get to the end or at some other point, I'll interrupt you again if you don't mind.
Anytime.
All right.
So I'm not sure why I put the slides in this order. I talked about contextual annotations and design guides on component roads. Then I talked about bridges. We just saw that slide. And then I'm jumping back more or less to road modeling again. So sorry about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about right-of-way modeling or rights-of-way modeling. In September, we added the notion of modeling legal boundaries in InfraWorks. And it could be used to model anything from a parcel or an easement, or in this case, a right-of-way. And we made a couple of enhancements that I think are most, and I'm going to talk about them in the context of rights-of-way. The most important one is right-of-way limits are now shown on the road section viewer. It's a pretty handy piece of information, especially if you're trying to evaluate a road design or the grading on that road design. We'll talk a little bit about grading in a second. So those are now visible on the section viewer, and if you can't tell what they are on that top screenshot, I've added a couple of big yellow arrows to make that clear. You won't see the yellow arrows in the software. Those are just there for clarification. In addition, when you select a right-of-way in your model, key dimensions are displayed. So when I talked a little bit about contextual annotations and design guides, this is another example of that. We're starting to get a little bit smarter about which dimensions we show so that you can, those dimensions that we do show you are actually kind of useful while you're designing. There are also a couple of enhancements to the way you lay out a legal boundary, whether that's a right-of-way or a parcel or an easement. And those things relate to curved geometry or adding arcs. So you can convert any line segment on a legal boundary to an arc or add an arc at any vertex. These are good for editing workflows. If you need to change the shape of a legal boundary, you need to add an arc where there wasn't one before, you can now do that. So we talked about showing rights-of-way on the road section viewer. That's kind of a good segue into roadside grading. So at the beginning of the webcast, Eric talked about the next webcast, which is, I think, January 18th. I think I have that date right. And the focus of that one will be on a lot of the grading functionality like this in InfraWorks. So if you'd like a much more in-depth look at what I'm showing on this particular slide, the next webcast will definitely be the one you want to catch. So in September, what we did is added some more grading functionality to InfraWorks, and what you saw was the ability to change the grading material or the grading slope on each side of the road. Whereas prior to September, you could specify a grading condition, but it applied to the entire road, both sides. You didn't have a lot of control over it, or any more control than that. And what we've worked on over the course of the year is progressively adding more control so that you can model much more complicated grading scenarios. I wouldn't say we're done yet. We're still thinking about things like how to grade or how to model grading that requires a terrace or ditches, things like that. We're not there yet. But this is another step in that direction, being able to really refine and control exactly what the grading looks like at any point along the road on either side of the road. So what we've done in this release is added the notion of grading zones. Basically, that means you can specify a start and end station, and for that particular side of the road you're working on, it might be the left, it might be the right, and you can specify a material and a slope. And you can have as many grading zones in as many locations along the length of your road as you wish. You can also specify the length of a transition between two grading zones so that you have some control over what happens when one grading zone ends and another one begins. You have some ability to control the length of the transition between the two. And from there, now that you have a significant amount of control over the grading design on the road, that leads into the idea of how quantities have updated. So in the last release, Earthwork Quantities were available, but were somewhat limited in the sense that you could select a road and see cut and fill values, but some data was excluded, such as the grading around bridges and the grading at intersections and roundabouts. And that was noted on the panels that showed the cut and fill information. The team has since refined that so that when you select a road and you look at the earthwork quantities, it now counts for everything along the selected road, like the intersections, like the roundabouts, and the bridges. The other thing that they decided to add maybe falls under the category of a usability improvement, maybe a feature enhancement, kind of a gray area. A lot of customers said when they're looking at earthwork for roadway design, they really need to be able to specify or limit the range they look at. They don't always want to look at the earthwork for an entire selected road. So they added a toggle that would allow you to specify a station range and view the earthwork quantities just within that station range. And that's what's shown here in the screenshot. There's a little toggle at the top of the earthwork quantities panel. And if you turn it on, you have the ability to specify the start and end station. Or you can turn it off and just see the earthwork quantities for the entire road design. One of the last things I'll talk about, but certainly not least, relates to modeling trees. Now, this might not necessarily fall quite cleanly under the category of an enhancement to detailed design capabilities in InfraWorks, but we do think it's an important addition. There's one special tree in InfraWorks. It's a beech tree. And it's different than all the other trees because the way it behaves is a little bit different. It uses what's called an adaptive style. And what makes it adaptive is this tree's ability to adjust the level of detail it shows based on distance of the tree to the camera and some other things. So that if you're zoomed quite far out, the level of detail that it regenerates is a lot less versus if you're zoomed in. Now that's all well and good, but what it means is if you have a model and you've decided to model forested areas or really large stands of trees using InfraWorks assets, trees, all the other tree styles, a lot of customers say that really large forested areas can bog down the performance of the model. This adaptive style should fix that. So the team has released one style that has this behavior. And depending on how it performs and depending on the kind of feedback we get from customers who try it, some already have. It's been in the rolling sandbox. I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of my presentation. But we want to see how it behaves in a production environment with real customers and real projects, and if in fact it's as successful as we think it will be, the team will be in a position to make plans to either upgrade the tree styles that are already in InfraWorks to have this behavior, or create a variety of new ones to duplicate the old styles, so that the process of modeling trees, and particularly forests, is a lot more efficient in InfraWorks. And I included the screenshot here because it might be a little hard to find the tree style amongst all the tree styles that are in InfraWorks, and I wanted to be sure everybody knew exactly what it looked like and how to find it if they wanted to give it a try. And that wasn't the last thing I was going to talk about. The very last thing is flood simulation. Now, while flood simulation is what we would call a complementary tool to InfraWorks, it's something you can buy from another company. The company is called Hydronia. We did want to present some of the enhancements because the team from Hydronia has made a couple of improvements, and they're significant. And they relate to how you define the inflow boundary condition for a simulation event. It used to be you could have one inflow condition and it would be defined as a flow versus time parameter, and we've updated that a little bit. So now you can have multiple inflow boundary conditions, which is the case in some complicated watersheds, even some not so complicated ones. You'll have inflows from a couple of different sources. You can also specify the inflow not just as flow versus time, but as elevation versus time, or surface elevation versus time. Some customers have said that elevation versus time is a little more practical. Generally, how they prefer to model flood simulate, or how they prefer to simulate floods for some projects. It can also be the way that you recreate or model a historical storm event. One of the examples we showed at Autodesk University was how we would use that surface elevation versus time to model something like Hurricane Sandy in New York City, which had a certain level of coastal surge along with the flooding. So if you have flood simulation, you'll see those. So before I move on to some of the items relevant to the roadmap, I wanted to put this slide out that just summarizes all of the enhancements that I went over. So if you're looking for a list of all the things that are new, this is a pretty good one. There might be a couple of things that I missed, but these are really the highlights. And it should be, I would say, is a pretty comprehensive list of all the new enhancements. So you'll see that we spent most of the time enhancing the modeling and analysis capabilities in InfraWorks, so that that's generally been the biggest bucket of our, if areas of focus were buckets, this would be the biggest bucket of focus. But we did spend a significant amount of time on the design and engineering experience too. And we expect going forward to still focus on those things to some degree. So in terms of what's up next, now it used to be that to hear about the product roadmap or to hear about what we were working on, you had to go to some sort of secret meeting somewhere that somebody invited you to, and you probably had to sign a few documents that, if you're like me, you never read them, you just sort of assumed that they said, don't talk about this stuff. And that's basically what they do say. But a lot of that's changing, and we've been given a lot of latitude to more freely share what we're working on. So when Eric goes over the safe harbor statement, when I talk about the safe harbor statement, that part about plan and future developments not being promises, this is the part that's meant to clue you into. So what's up next? At Autodesk, our fiscal year ends at the end of February, so we're actually, even though the calendar is flipped to a new year, as Autodesk employees, we celebrate the new year March 1st. So we're still working on our last year's goals or our last year's resolutions to transition InfraWorks to an engineering design tool for transportation. One of the things we're starting to think about, though, is how we start transitioning some of our focus, which up to this point has really been on the design and engineering experience and modeling, and begin to broaden our focus to that third theme of connected workflows, and to an extent platform, but really the focus is connected workflows so that we can deliver connected BIM experience for the infrastructure portfolio. So over the next couple of months, we'll continue to focus on views in InfraWorks. One of the things teams are doing right now is gathering feedback so we can figure out how to enrich this experience. We've looked at things like creating an engineering design view, some sort of a default view that really gives the impression that InfraWorks is not just a visualization tool, that it is in fact an engineering design and visualization tool. So we're looking at that. We're looking at different ways to work on presentation views. Presentation views might be a highly rendered view. We could create presentation views that take advantage of other technologies at InfraWorks that are good at creating photorealistic models for presentation purposes. We might actually look at ways at creating documentation views or some kind of documentation style output from an InfraWorks model. Again, all of these things are planned, not making any promises as to when any of these things will be delivered, but it's one of the things we're looking at when we look at how we improve the usefulness of views in InfraWorks. Two of the things we're looking at related to modeling focus on reality capture and road design. So with reality capture in InfraWorks, you can process a point cloud, you can simplify a point cloud, you can view it, you can theme it, you can extract a terrain from it, and you can extract some assets from it. We're currently looking at ways to extract more information from that point cloud so that it can be used to model a road or a curb line or a ditch. So we're looking at ways to extract more information that would help us build more feature-like assets in InfraWorks. Another thing we're looking at is extending and expanding the quantities estimates in InfraWorks. We have some good functionality in there around earthworks and cut fill values, but we want to expand that into being able to quantify road materials. And that can be things like the amount of pavement needed for a particular roadway design, length of curbing needed for a roadway project. You can also begin to count things that I think in InfraWorks are called road decorations sometimes, which is, I feel a little silly using that word, but it's things like guardrail and lights and signage alongside a road that you'd want to include with a quantity and cost estimate for a roadway design project. So we're looking at ways to do that as well. In terms of improving the usability of some of the analytical functionality in InfraWorks, this relates to quantities because quantities is one of those analytical pieces. We're looking at ways to consolidate how you access analytics about your model, whether that's drainage analytics, earthwork analytics, quantities, traffic simulation, centralizing how you access that so that it's not scattered all over the product, which I think right now is the case. And depending on your perspective, it either appears scattered or analytics are placed precisely adjacent to the assets that are used to generate those analytics. So kind of a different approach to how we look at the usability of analytics in InfraWorks. In terms of bridge modeling, the teams over the course of the year, if you look at what the teams have done, not just with InfraWorks and bridge modeling, but with other products in the bridge design space, they're really looking at ways to complete design workflows that would be used to model really common types of bridges, short and medium span bridges, or as I called them before, the bread and butter, meat and potatoes bridges that are used by many departments of transportation. Not the iconic bridges necessarily, although at some point in the future modeling those will be a focus, but for now it's short and medium span bridges, and they want to finish those workflows. And the next thing they want to look at, or one of the next things they may choose to look at, is how to model basic tunnels in InfraWorks 360. And this could be approached in phases. A basic tunnel might mean a tunnel with a consistent cross-section from start to finish. And over time, modeling more geometrically complex tunnels would be possible where the cross-section can vary at given points, or the portals of the tunnel can have separate design parameters that can, again, increase the complexity of design. But to start, I think modeling basic tunnels is probably where we'll begin. So that's just a taste of what some of the teams are looking at. This is a bit of a teaser. there's a plan to publish an updated roadmap, an update to the one we published last January, not last January, in July, sorry. And that update will be ready in a couple of days, where there'll be a lot more detail about all the different aspects of InfraWorks and what some of our plans in those areas will be. There'll be some additional information about road design and road grading. There'll be some additional information about connected workflows. And yeah, that's all I can say about that for now. But if you grab that QR code, it will take you to the InfraWorks 360 forum. It will take you to what the last roadmap post was. And you can expect something very similar to that, just with a lot different information in the next couple of days. I'm waiting for it to be approved by the powers that be. That's why I'm not sharing it right now. And the last thing I will leave this group with is an invitation to join the InfraWorks 360 Rolling Sandbox. So I talked a little bit about how we share product roadmaps and how we have latitude to share them a lot more freely than we used to, a lot more publicly than we used to. We also share our work in progress software a lot more freely than we ever used to before. And part of that is technology has gotten to the point where it's a lot easier to share builds. Our processes have gotten a lot more efficient, allows us to share these builds more frequently. So you can always wait for a webcast like this to hear about what the new release features are, but if you want a little bit more of a preview or a preview about those new features even earlier, you can join the Rolling Sandbox, because we release a new build every 2 weeks, and you can watch our progress in 2-week increments. There's a couple of forums where you can post questions or just hear what other people are saying about some of the new features, and you can test it out for yourself. There's a really big, giant, long link to the part of the beta forum where you join the Rolling Sandbox. Probably the easiest way for anyone on this call to get an invitation is to just email me, and I'll send you an invitation that includes a link and a little more detail about what the Sandbox is and how we use it and what our goals are. And that is all I have about what's new in the latest update, which has not yet been released. The plan is to release it by the end of today. If you already have InfraWorks 360, you'll get a notification through the Autodesk desktop app that the new update is ready. If you don't have InfraWorks 360, I would say probably by the end of the week, but don't hold me to that, the trial download link will be updated to give you access to the latest version, and you can use the trial if you haven't tried it out. And with that, now I'm definitely done. So I'll turn it back over to Eric.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. That was great. We had tons and tons and tons of questions in the questions panel, and our crew in the background has been doing a great job of staying on top of those. Lots of questions about specific features, you know, when this or that, that those guys are addressing, and that I think a lot have been addressed with your recent discussion on the roadmap. So I think we're in pretty good shape as far as questions go. The one I was going to throw out there, you just answered as far as how the folks on the call get their hands on the latest release. So Sarah provided that information about where to watch for the links and other means to download the latest release. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to switch back to myself as presenter, and I just want to remind everyone one last time that we have a webcast coming up on January 18th. I know Nick would really appreciate if you join him for this webcast, which is going to be on advanced grading and transitions with component roads. So please join us for that one. That'll be 2 weeks from now, same time, 12 to 1 Eastern, and Nick and Seth will be taking a deep dive into component roads. I'm going to give the folks answering questions in the background just one quick opportunity to see if there's anything that they want to mention that came up that's of interest. Guys, Elliot, Nick, anybody have anything they want to talk about? Looks like they're knocking it down in the text window quite well. So we're going to leave it at that. And
actually, I'm going to raise one issue. I'm looking at what the questions are now that I'm not sharing. And it relates to one of the things that was in the poll at the beginning. I think 2/3 or more of the audience wanted to see improvements to site design first. And I wanted to address that. Also, the part of the question before that, I think it was, what are you using InfraWorks for? What kinds of projects? And it was an equal, well, not an equal split, but just it was 60% site design and 60% road design. So people were using InfraWorks for both of those types of projects pretty frequently, and everyone agreed that site design improvements are what they wanted to see next. That's what I took out of the poll. And it was good to see because it kind of aligns with how we've approached our focus for the year. I promise not to repeat the goal for InfraWorks this year again, because you're probably tired of hearing it, but what you have heard is we're focused on transportation, specifically road and highway design. And you can see that when you look at the highlights of the releases that we've made throughout the year, including the one today. The one thing I do want to point out is, even though the functionality that you're seeing is very specific to road design, and I'm going to throw out the example of grading. We've done a lot of work on roadside grading, giving you more control over how you design that. What you don't see necessarily, though, is that particular team, or the team that worked on roadside grading, they spent just as much time, if not more, working on a foundation or a framework for overall grading design in InfraWorks. And what that means is, even though the functionality that you're seeing is very road specific, a lot of the foundational work, whether that's for grading, whether that's for areas of interest like rights of ways or parcels or easements, same thing for drainage to an extent. A lot of that, the foundations for those features can be extended to other aspects of design, like residential subdivision design, which wasn't the most popular one, but there are people who are doing that work, or site design. More specifically, what I mean is, a lot of the foundational work that was done for grading and for drainage and for some other things can be applied to parking lot design or building pad grading, and things that you would probably use more frequently in a site design project over a transportation one. And the reason I bring it up is, I don't want people to come away from the session thinking that we're not focused on site design, because the reality is we actually do have an eye on it. It's been about 1,000,000 years since I worked in an engineering firm, but one of the things I'm pretty sure is still the case is that most firms try to look at their backlog of work and they balance it. They want some public sector work, like road and highway projects, and they want some private sector work, which tends to be pretty much pretty heavily rooted in site design or land development design. We know that's the case for the industries that we serve, and we keep an eye on that when we think about what we're developing and how we prioritize what we're going to work on or what we're going to deliver for the year. We made a conscious choice to focus this year rather than scatter the team's efforts across a number of different things. Like, we could have chosen to focus on site design and road design and bridge design and utility design and drainage design. All of those things are important, and I'm pretty sure if I asked everybody on the call if they needed those things, they'd nod their heads and say yes. This year we chose to really hone in our focus on just one area and really get that right before we started to branch out to other things. And part of the reason for that decision was we needed to build a foundation for a number of things that can be applied to a number of different industries.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. That was some awesome insight into into what you guys are thinking, and that's really what this webcast series is all about. So much appreciated.
Yep.
All right.
And
well,
hey, Eric and Sarah, this is Elliot here. I've been monitoring some of these questions. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the line who's been submitting these questions. These are awesome and really in-depth, and we do track these. So if your question wasn't answered, we're going to do our best to get back to you after this broadcast.
Thanks, Elliot. And I was actually thinking, we've got a few minutes before the scheduled end of the webcast. I think what I might do is let the webcast open so that you guys can maybe work on answering some of these last few questions in the last 5 minutes. But we can end the presentation now, but leave the question panel open to give you guys a chance to do that. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. But unless anyone else has anything to add in, Sarah or the team in the background, I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. And once again,
I'll stay on the line to answer questions for as long as anyone's there.
Okay. And once again, just thanks to everyone for attending. We had a huge crowd show up today, And thanks for all the great questions, as Elliot pointed out, and Happy New Year to everyone. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Thanks.